Hey everyone, welcome to Listen Let's Connect. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with Somi. We do these quite often, but today we are here to celebrate Black History Month. And unfortunately, for some reason, America feels like we have to put it in 1 month when it should be all the time, all year round.
Hi, everyone. So yes, we are celebrating Black History Month, which is American history, however you look at it. But we're also very grateful for the opportunity to have a focus on the extensive contributions that Black people have made in America. Having a month to kind of emphasize that puts a spotlight on things. So we are very grateful for that. So, thank you, Savannah, for just this topic, which I think is very, very necessary. So when we talk about Black history and we talk about mental health and bringing those two topics together, you can talk Black history without going back to Africa. And being a Nigerian woman, it's very important to me that even in connecting with a lot of my African-American friends or Black friends here in America, is giving that background and understanding that Black history does not start with slavery. That is not the beginning of Black people. So in saying that, I think it's so important from a mental health standpoint to put into context that a lot of things were happening in Africa, things that were not abnormal to what was going on around the world. There were struggles, tribal situations, ethnic situations, many different things and wars and things of the like. However, within the African culture, there was definitely this element of definitely their culture, their language, their spirituality, their religion, and also just the element of a lot of royalty embedded in the African culture. Even till today, you find people that are chiefs or kings or, prince or princesses, depending on, their background, and my father happens to be a chief. So having that understanding that prior to colonization and prior to the slave trade, African people had their way of doing things. They had, like I said, their culture, spirituality, language, the whole nine. And when you think about mental health, you have to think about the fact that all of a sudden you have foreigners, kidnappers. I mean, they were foreigners, but they were also kidnappers. We have to be very honest in our understanding and also dialogue of these things. A lot, and we don't even know the amount, it's in the millions of Africans that were kidnapped. And I want to emphasize that word because we keep saying they were just taken sometimes. The language is always often changed to say they were kidnapped. So let's say there were prior traumas to that. But as anybody that has been kidnapped, or even when we hear stories of people being kidnapped, it's a highly traumatic situation. And not only are you kidnapped, you're chained. You can't understand what the white colonizers are saying. They don't speak your language. Their religion is different. There's just so many things that were just drastically different. And then on top of that, you're stripped, they barely had any clothes on. The conditions in these ships heading to the Caribbeans or to the Americas, wherever, were just horrific, and So we start off with just that kidnapping, then we're talking about the suicides that occurred as they were going through this middle passage. There's an actual one historic mass suicide that occurred. They were actually a group of Igbo people. So one of the things people don't realize, the Gold Coast, or just that area in which a lot of Africans were taking, covers Ghana, Nigeria, Benin. It's the west coast of the country. A lot of the people were kidnapped from that area. And so there were a group of these Igbo people from Nigeria that just were like, listen, we're not having this, and would rather die than be taken from our land and be put somewhere, stripped of our culture, or our spirituality, or religion, the whole nine. And so that was, you had witnesses to the suicides, and this was a massive suicide. There's actually a memorial to that event. And so you had the massive suicides, you had homicides, whether the slaves were revolting and killing the white colonizers, or kidnappers, or enslavers, or the white colonizers were killing the slaves. There are times where they were dumping them, depending on whether their health or there was an issue, and they were being dumped through the Atlantic or along the Atlantic. And then, and I should say this is a very sensitive topic as we're talking about mental health and giving this history. Then there were attacks on the women, violent attacks, in any form you can think of that you could attack a woman. A lot of these women experience that. And a lot of times the men, even their husbands and their children, had to watch these horrific events. So when you look at all of that, and you look at the plight of Black people coming into this other world, that their name had to be changed. Everything was changed. They even had to come together and form Pidgin English, because they all spoke different languages from different countries. And so they couldn't even understand each other in some places, depending on where they were sold to. So they had to come together and figure out a language that they could speak, that they could all hear. So just giving that brief history, just that alone sets up this whole race in such a way that the trauma is extensive. Now, when you think about mental health as we have it right now, we think of it in a very conventional way, in the sense of you go to an office. Well, now with COVID, things have changed. You have a lot of telehealth going on. So people are brought into each other's homes or into each other's, spaces in a different way, because it's not in offices anymore. But when I think in the history, my history as a Nigerian woman, and some of my ancestors that were sold into slavery or kidnapped, that profession was not necessarily there or labeled as such. So you have somebody going through a hard time, even as they got on American soil, the trauma and the horrific incidences don't stop. They actually, it just keeps escalating and gets worse. And then you have instances where children are ripped from their mothers and from their families at a very young age, or even, from birth or even younger. And that element of grief that can come to a mother and it feeling like a death. And so what a lot of times Black people had to lean on was their spirituality and religion. And the religion, in a lot of ways, was given to them. It was kind of forced on them. You're going to be a Christian. This is what it's going to be. And in a lot of cases, obviously, they weren't allowed to read, but the element of reading the Bible was afforded to some of them. And that's how a lot of slaves were able to read. But church spirituality was a huge, huge component for them. And the music and the spirituals was how they got through horrific experiences. And so even now, when you talk to a lot of Black people all over the world, even as a Nigerian, I worked in Nigeria for a while, providing, trauma care. It was still this cleaving to God, to spirituality, to whatever religion they ascribe to. That was the way to deal with mental health issues, and still has strong holds and elements even now. And one of the things I realized, especially in my work in Nigeria, and particularly with the Chibok girls and other Boko Haram survivors, is that I was trained here in America in a very conventional way of providing mental health services. But what I realized really quickly and early on, and I'm so grateful for this, is that these conventional practices are often not culturally competent. They're not culturally appropriate. And they completely disregard the beautiful tapestry that makes up each individual that is non-white. And so when I think about how, even when we say the stigma in mental health, and is particularly among, and we're focusing mainly, on Blacks. I mean, obviously there's a stigma with other races, but with Black people, there is a stigma that this idea of therapy wasn't isn't now afforded to us, but it hasn't always been afforded to us. More importantly, it was presented in such a way that it disregarded other elements of what Black people consider a comfort and ways to process things that they've gone through. So even as we look at it in this focus now, as I said, it's so important, whether you're a Black therapist, you're Hispanic therapist, you're white therapist, you're Native American, you're Asian, whatever race you are, when it comes to treating or helping Black people through mental health issues, it's so important that their cultural, spiritual, religious, anything that they find important and makes up who they are is incorporated into their mental health treatment or the mental health process. To not do that, I don't see how we effectively help Black people, whether with the stigma or with this element of processing mental health issues properly, or even feeling emotionally safe to say, I'm struggling with depression or anxiety or complex trauma or PTSD or any of the bipolar, whatever the diagnoses are that we have. I'll bring up real quick, again, because it is Black History Month, and I keep up a lot with what is happening, especially in non-white spaces. From a mental health standpoint, it's so important to me that as a mental health professional that I am able to help anyone with mental health issues, not just Nigerian people or Black people or Hispanic people or whatever the case may be. And I bring this young lady up because she's the most recent. I think every week since the start of this new year, and this is of the ones we know of, there has been a Black person or person that identifies as Black that has committed suicide. And one of the things that, I was just having a conversation with a dear friend of mine. She happens to be, a Nigerian American physician. And we were talking about how I brought up this concept of high functioning depression and high functioning anxiety. And so a lot of times, especially with Black women, the person I'm talking about is Miss USA. She recently, committed suicide here in New York. And when I heard about her experience, I also knew a few people that knew her personally and how much of a shock it was for them. Mm-hmm. And even for her mother, it was a bit of a shock. Her mother just spoke out and even mentioned that she wasn't aware that her daughter, until just I guess when it was just maybe a little late, in her words, that her daughter was struggling with depression. And I remember there's a Black woman that recently wrote an article, and she said that when she heard about her passing, she immediately went to her Instagram, which is something I had done the day she passed as well. And I did it because it informs my approach to what I do and my understanding. Lately, I keep telling everybody that the way depression used to look is not the way depression looks anymore. Yeah. And I often use the phrase, depression wears a smile. I can't tell you how many people that I know that are depressed, sometimes high functioning, but what you see publicly, you see the smile, you see the beautiful Instagram pictures, you see all these different things. I've even seen it in children, young children, where, I had a young boy say to me, and I felt terrible. It happened to be a Black young boy. And I was being given this picture or narrative that he's okay. But he was telling me he's not okay. And one of the things that happened was I was sent a whole bunch of pictures of him smiling in different activities and with different people. And I saw that, and I was like, well, see, look at the evidence, you're okay. And his response, and this is how I got that phrase, he said, just because I'm smiling doesn't mean I'm okay. So even at a young age, we have, whether through modeling, through society, through what we're telling people, we have convinced even children, smile through it, push through it. Don't be vulnerable. Don't show people that I'm hurting. And it's taking every energy out of me to be this good kid or to be this well-behaved individual, especially in schools and things of that sort. So I bring that up because if from a Black perspective and as a Black woman, there hasn't for years, and going back from Africa to the Middle Passage, slavery, civil rights movement, on and on till today. There often isn't that emotional space to land and not have to put on this smile. Same thing goes, it even goes for Black males. You know, one of the things that is always, if you look at the history, Black males have had to smile and watch their loved ones, whether their mothers, their children, go through horrific things. And if they in any way retaliated, then they were severely punished or killed. So there's this narrative of America has, as a society, and I wouldn't even just say America, globally, there hasn't been a space to say, we're hurting, this hurts. It takes every bit of energy in me to get up and do and be, and this smile takes all my energy. And when I get home, you know, I'm exhausted. So I say that all to say, as we go through this month in the history of America, with a focus on Black people, and given that Exceptional Heroes has a focus on mental health, and you being an advocate for a lot of mental health issues and concerns, given your experience, we shouldn't forget about the severely marginalized. We should really focus on looking behind, beyond that smile. I'll mention a few, specifically Viola Davis, a really brilliant African-American, Black actress. I don't know how she identifies, so I want to be very clear about that. She's very adamant about bringing attention to mental health issues and the plight of Black women, especially with depression. Last week, she did something about depression, Wears a Smile. This week, she's posted something about people, the way we talk and how we are dismissive, or we assume because their Instagram looks like this, or they're dressed this way and everything. And the reality is, the young lady that just, you know, committed suicide, to the public, she had it all. Her life was great. She somebody just even said, oh, I just saw her. She did an interview with Denzel Washington. And I'm like, we have to get better at realizing that our society has conditioned and trained us not to show up authentically and show up as we are in our vulnerability. Because the reality and the truth is, Savannah, if this young woman came out, you know, or throughout her life was just like, listen, I'm really struggling. I'm having a hard time. Right now, we could say, oh yeah, everybody would come to her and whatever, and give her the support she needs and everything else. And that's possible. It's possible that if she had come out, that she would have had that.
Could I interrupt you real quick?
Absolutely.
There is this thing that I saw. I don't remember where I saw it, but they were showing the two that I remember were two Black men. It was Kanye West, and they said, look, he showed up and showed that he was bipolar, and people laughed at him and made him into a meme. Will Smith, when he was divorced, he was upfront about it on his sadness, and everyone laughed at him, and he became a meme. Why are we laughing at people? And why are we laughing at people? And this is why men, and possibly And given that the Black History Month, Black men hide it. It's because we will judge them for it if they're open about it.
Yes. And I mean, I won't touch Kanye because I have thoughts about Kanye and his behaviors. But yes, you are right. Kanye did come out and said, you know, listen, this is my issue, or this is what I'm struggling with. With Will Smith, I don't know if you've heard about his new book or his memoir that he came out with last year. Very raw, very transparent, very vulnerable. And even when he was doing his book tour, he was just very vulnerable and transparent with all the different ways that he and the process and the everything he's had to put in place to get to a place, and he's still on that journey of liking himself, feeling better, feeling stable. And given just who I am, I appreciate and respect people that do that, because you don't know what you do for like millions of other people that are watching, especially because he has such that platform, but they're watching and they're able to come out to their family. They're able to say, no, I'm not going to take my life today because I heard Will Smith and I admire him and he's vulnerable and he's able to just, fully be and figure things out. And, even Will talked a bit about his early childhood trauma. I often tell people, when we see adults behaving a certain way, it's what I called adults recovering from their childhoods. Because everything is tied to that. A core aspect of who we are, how we're fashioned, what we believe, what we think, everything starts from that childhood. And that's one of the things why I'm so passionate about working with children and helping children navigate issues at such a young age and come into an understanding of who they are and the appropriate ways to navigate feelings, thoughts, the whole nine, and giving them that toolbox, or even giving them at a young age a Shelby or a Monroe and saying, here you have this all-encompassing tool, therapeutic device to help you navigate some of the things, the dysregulation in your nervous system. So when again, for everybody watching, yes, to all other people, mental health issues is not a respecter of persons or race or religion or whatever the case may be, but we're talking Black history, and a Black history is every day, but this particular month is set aside for this. So we're looking at how the spaces we've created for Black people to be vulnerable and transparent and say, I'm struggling. We're so comfortable with anger, but we're not comfortable with pain. We're not comfortable with sadness, especially with Black men. I don't know how many Black men I've spoken to over the years that have said, I could be angry. And that showed strength. I was a strong Black man. But if I was crying, if I had the pain, if I was showing my other emotions, then I was weak. And especially out in the streets or just in general, you want street cred. You don't want to be looked at as weak because you're going to be preyed on. That kind of mentality. But even as Black women, it's like you have to show up. We often say the strong Black woman. Taraji P. Henson, who's another huge advocate for mental health issues in the Black community, just came out and she's like, we need to retire this word, the strong Black woman. I would even go further that this concept of resilience, we're always, a child is going through a whole thing. Well, children are resilient. No, people have to be resilient because of really horrible circumstances. So I almost feel like that word resiliency is an element of toxic positivity. It's like we're disregarding, how about we take away the things? We remove these things that are causing people so much trauma and pain, instead of saying, oh, look, they went through all of that, so they're resilient. And, the other day I was reading a book called Our Legacy to my son. And there was that word again, Black, your ancestors were resilient. And I'm like, what choice did they have?
Yeah.
Like, you strip them of everything. You're giving this whole history of all the things they had to endure and deal with. And then over on this side, you're like, well, but look, they're resilient. How about we don't do these things? How about we take away these things so that people don't have to be resilient? Yeah. So they can show up as their, authentic selves.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's a lot. It's just a lot to there's a lot to it. Like, people don't realize how much people hide. And just like that word resilient, like you said, it's toxic positivity. There you go. I could speak. But thank you so much for coming on, explaining all of this that is so important for people, not just Blacks, but for other cultures, whites, Hispanics, everyone. Everyone should know about each culture, because it is important. It is important on how all of us deal with mental health and why. Why do we look at mental health that way? Why do we do it? And you gave the perfect example of why Black people go to the spiritual route, which makes sense because they were forced with the religion when they came over to the land, because you said that they went all over, not just America, correct?
Yeah, I mean, wherever you see Black people, the origination is Africa. It's like, so whether you're in the Caribbean, you're in Cuba, you're in Europe, wherever you find them, and I'm not just talking about right now. If you go back in history, it was just wherever they were sold to, is wherever they landed. Now, a large concentration of them were in America, absolutely, because that was the point of this whole horrific event. It was that, they were being brought here to till the land and create, be significant contributors to the creation of America. And I just also want to say, as we end, as we talk about this, I want the message to be that it takes a little time, and it takes being intentional, but there are spaces for Black people to emotionally land and emotionally be vulnerable and emotionally and deal with whether mental health issues, traumas, whatever the case may be that they may be going through. There's also a space for their religion and spirituality in the regard of processing mental health issues. So for me, it's not either or. Mm-hmm. If we really truly believe it's mind, body, spirit, then there's a space for your spirituality and religion to be incorporated within mental health. And there's a space for your mental health to be incorporated in your spirituality. So you don't need to feel like I just go to church and I pray it away, or, somebody's trying to perform some kind of an exorcism because there's some spirit that, that's come over you. So just even that concept of bringing those two together. So here we're bringing Black history and mental health together. I also want within that context, and because a lot of Black people are more comfortable within their religion or spirituality in dealing with issues, I also want that merging of mental health and spirituality to come together, especially for Black people, because that's where they draw their strength from. So this element of separateness does not need to exist. There's a room, especially if you're dealing with the right therapist. I should emphasize that.
Yeah.
A holistic, comprehensive, informed therapist will recognize there is room for every element of your being that is important to you within a mental health space.
And I'll post resources down below in the description for all of you, and maybe some articles. Thank you again, Somi. Thank you everyone for watching. Yes. And always remember to listen, love, connect. Bye.